Of Bloodborne's many macabre bosses, the fight against Mergo's Wet Nurse is one, to me at least, that stands out above the rest. In fighting this creature, you have to dance around the stage and learn its movements. It's honestly my favorite of the many bosses I've faced in my dozens of playthroughs. But something else stands to reason why this boss is so interesting. Perhaps there's something lying within its mythology. Let's first look at this boss in the game. At the highest point of the castle within the Nightmare of Mensis is the final boss of the area, Mergo's Wet Nurse. Witnessing their entry, we see that the Wet Nurse doesn't splat or slam into the ground. Instead, it provides a more graceful entrance and even a protective one as it hides away the baby Mergo like its guardian angel. As you fight, the Wet Nurse attacks with its 6 curved blades, trying desperately to slice and dice your hunter to pieces. In addition, they will even cover the stage in a shroud of darkness, attempting to catch you off guard. Ultimately, your hunter succeeds in putting Mergo and their Wet Nurse to rest. There's a lot to unpack, but looking at the design of Mergo's Wet Nurse, we can learn quite a lot. One of the most obvious is the fact that the Wet Nurse is completely covered in veiled clothing, leaving only an opening for where their head and neck should be, leaving their true form open to interpretation. It's worth noting that the channel Sinclair lore actually touches on this design as well, noting that this veiled look was typical of mothers and nannies during the Victorian era. I've left a link in the description so you can check out their video on this for yourself. Continuing this, the veiled look and the many adornments on the Wet Nurse show a much more ceremonial aspect to it. I believe this is because the Wet Nurse is meant to be a noble great one, or akin to the nobility of the Temerians of Yharnam. However, the coloration is distinctly lacking, showing only black and dark blues and purples, colors that are often associated with funeral proceedings. As Great Ones are unable to bear children, we can imagine that this apparition represents death in its many forms. One aspect of death comes from the book of Revelation in the Christian Bible. It states, "When the Lamb broke the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature saying, 'Come.' I looked, and behold an ashen horse, and he who sat on it had the name Death, and Hades was following with him." This is the Horseman of Death, one of the 4 that was said to bring the apocalypse to Earth. Notably, when this horseman descends onto the land, he appears riding a pale horse and drains the color of the world, bringing the end along with them. As you make your way to Mergo, there's a discoloration to the arena and to the fight against the Wet Nurse, connecting strongly to the fact that this quote-unquote caretaker is really meant to be a sign of the end, not only for Mergo, but perhaps yourself as well. Additionally, during the fight with Mergo's Wet Nurse, they do not bleed like the other Great Ones you face. Instead, puffs of smoke and dust appear with each hit, enforcing this connection to the Pale Rider of Death. As this rider was a partial skeleton with their skin dried and adhered to their bones, they no longer retained their blood. As well, this Pale Rider wielded a weapon and tool, much like the weapon that Mergo's Wet Nurse wields, the scythe. In my video covering the Grim Reaper in Bloodborne, I discussed the formation of the death-wielding scythe. But to briefly reiterate, the scythe is a tool meant for harvesting and gathering grasses and wheat that has been used for thousands of years. In ancient Greece, the Titan Kronos is depicted with the sickle, as he was the patron deity of the harvest, even having a period for the harvest known as the Cronion. This sickle would eventually be used with the deity Kronos, who was the personification of time, and would later be depicted holding the scythe. Eventually, Kronos and his scythe would be associated with the gathering of souls for the end of mortals' lives. However, there were other depictions of death in Greek mythology that connects to the winged Great One. One such was the personification of death itself, Thanatos. Born from Nyx alone, Thanatos was the deity that represented the peaceful and non-violent way of death, and had a twin brother, Hypno, the personification of sleep. Thanatos, much like the wet nurse, is depicted with the black wings of the crow or raven, and is often imagined wearing a black robe, showing his lineage to the night. Though it is neither us nor the wet nurse who receive the death that Thanatos brought. Instead, it's Mergo, as when the baby dies, their cries fade and lessen until there is silence. Providing the peaceful death that Thanatos brought. As for the wet nurse, another creature of death in Greek mythology represented the more violent aspect of it. The Kyries were the spirits or demons of death, drawn solely to the violent and bloody deaths that many received in the battlefield. These creatures were the spirits of the night that would feast upon the dead bodies like vultures to roadkill. It's with these Kyries that Mergo's wet nurse draws much of its vicious nature as both claw and slice, being depicted as birds with feminine features. Showing their dark raven wings and blade-like talons, they could rip and tear through anything. In the epic poem, The Shield of Heracles, Hesiod describes these demons as having shimmering white teeth that could gnash and tear the flesh off the freshly dead of the battlefield, wanting above all else the dark blood of the dead, even referring to them as the Black Dooms, a phrase that is most fitting for this daunting Great One. Among the many psychopomps, or beings dealing with the death of mortals, the Angel of Death is one that has the most popularity, but is also the most elusive to pin down. Among the many myths and religions that discuss death, it is the Abrahamic religions like Islam and Rabbinic or Kabbalistic Judaism that depict or infer the Angel of Death. One of these, the angel Azrael, is found within Islamic myth and takes the newly dead to their afterlife. Found in Surah 32:11 of the Quran, it states, "The angel of death, who has been entrusted with you, will take you. Then to your Lord you will be returned," showing exactly what the job of the angel of death was. As the archangel, Azrael is often depicted as fair-skinned, with black wings, though some have shown him with multiple wings, like many of the other archangels beside him. What differentiates Azrael from the others is that he does not wield a sword like the other archangels, but instead he wields the scythe, using it mainly to reap the souls and the heads of sinful mortals, bringing them down to the depths of hell for eternity. In terms of the wet nurse, both these angels share their duality for the care of others, as the wet nurse lands softly to protect and secure the baby Mergo from harm. Azrael guides and escorts the righteous to heaven, though each show their true form and hostile nature as they attack and cut through any of those they deem sinful and unrighteous. In addition to this, it's worth noting that the wet nurse has nearly identical wings to the angel of death, Azrael. Though these wings look to be maimed and tattered, their foreboding visage is shared with the angel's wings, making Mergo's wet nurse both a guardian angel and an angel of death. Which leaves me asking, whose death are they the angel of? Let me know what you think down below. If you're new to the channel and enjoy these, please make sure to subscribe and like the video to show your support. If you're interested in learning more about the Great Ones, then click here, or you can check out my first video on Death and the Grim Reaper here. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you all next time.